Okay. Right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Change Committee meeting today, Thursday the 5th of August. A special welcome to our new board member and committee member, Angelina Foster. Welcome. And our other new board member, Stuart Ballingal, isn't able to join us today, but he'll obviously be at the next Change Committee. Heather, would you like to take us through apologies, please?
Okay, Heather Gregg, board support team. We've got apologies today from Stuart Ballingal, board member, as you mentioned, from DCO Ross Haggart, and from ACO John Dickey for the public session.
And John's joining us for the private session. Yeah. Okay. Item 3 on the agenda: consideration of and decision on any items to be taken in private. Nope. Good, thank you. Declaration of interest? None, thank you. And then minutes of the previous meeting from the 6th of May. I'll just go through these page by page, and please call out if you have any corrections or comments. So page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, and page 9. Good. And thank you to those that have the pleasure of producing these minutes. That's not an easy task, so thanks to the board support team. We'll therefore approve these as accurate minutes of the previous meeting. On to the action log. Heather.
Thank you, Chair. So just to confirm the rolling action log, we have 9 actions in total, 7 of which have been marked as completed. So just to confirm that the committee are content with the position statement updates against these and for these to be removed accordingly. That then leaves 2 actions outstanding, one from the 5th of November 2020, which is item 8.5.6, and that's relating to the comms and engagement being appropriately integrated into projects.
Yeah, see that one, we've kind of drifted off what I think we were originally trying to do here. So as you have just said, the question was around the importance, how we were emphasising the importance of comms and engagement into all our projects. That's really the question. And the recruitment of individuals, it doesn't really answer that. I know it's going to help eventually, but it doesn't really answer that question. So can we update the position statement to actually begin to answer the question? Does that make sense? I can see Andy's nodding, and Gillian, that's good. So is that an action on PMO to update that position statement? Yeah, okay. Right, thank you.
Okay.
And have you got that as an action then, Heather, yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
So on back to the action log, that then leaves 1 further outstanding action from the 4th of February 2021, item 8, relating to progress on key milestones being included within the dashboard report. This has been included in the dashboard report, which is on today's agenda, and the committee therefore may be content for this action to be closed off.
Yeah, I'm happy it's closed. Everybody happy with that?
Could Chair and
yeah.
Nick Barr, board member, can we just make sure we come back to that at the end? Would you mind? Slightly pedantic, but I just think it's worth doing that at the end.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Remind me. That's fine. That's the action log, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Heather. SMB action log, Paul, are you talking to that?
Yes, I am, Chair. The SMB action log, there are 3 actions currently remaining on the log, and there is nothing significant to note for the committee if you're content with that, Chair, but
Yep.
Also more than happy to discuss anything if there's any members of the committee wishing to do so.
No, I've got no questions. Everybody happy? Yeah, fine. Thank you. That takes us on then to the value added statement. You've all read it, so I'm not going to go through it again. Has anybody got any comments to make on the value added statement?
Excellent.
Brian?
Thank you, Fiona.
Brian.
Brian Baverstock, board member. Just a couple of things. Well, one substantive thing, Fiona. I wonder if we're missing a wee bit of text round about the conclusion of the committee's efforts. You know, something along the line about, you know, the level of general assurance that we were able to take from our work, and if there are any sort of ongoing issues, for example, CCF, that we maybe just want to highlight. So I was thinking after the section that talks about the summary of the committee's work, whether we could just end that with a couple of sentences, you know, to reflect those things.
So to reflect
that, well, we say what we've done, but we don't really conclude to say, are we satisfied with what we've seen? And are there any ongoing areas, for example, CCF, where for understandable reasons that there are ongoing issues, and just conclude in that way.
Okay. I'm just thinking.
Chair, Nick Barr.
Yeah.
I just have a slight question mark in my head as to whether or not we're straying more into a committee report. There's a subtlety here. A committee report on its business as opposed to a review of the previous year and the value it added. So if it's a value added statement, it's about what value did we add, and would saying the CCMS work, which we all recognize as long and complicated, I don't know, are you following my drift here a little bit? It's a bit vague, I know, but I'm just wondering whether or not that's more that I sort of see what Brian means there, but are we not in danger of straying into basically the change committee's report to the board as opposed to a review of the previous year? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a thought.
I mean,
I'm not hard over either way, by the way.
If I may come back in, I mean, perhaps it's my misunderstanding of what the value added statement is intended to do, but I assumed one of the things that it was intended to do was to form or provide some summary of the assurance that we've been able to take from our work, and report that assurance in summative form to the board. And if some of that assurance is incomplete or less than what we expect, we should we not just signal that as well? So that's my perspective on it.
I must admit, I found this particularly hard to write, I have to say, because there is a subtlety in terms of, you know, we do all of these things, but as Nick's just said, you know, how do you actually describe what value we actually added? Can I suggest leave this with me and let me reflect this conversation and try and just tighten it up a wee bit to cover the points that both Brian and Nick have made. Yeah, good. Okay. Thank you for those comments. Does anybody get any other comments on the value added statement? No? Good. Thank you. Moving
Angelina's
on
hand
then.
up.
Oh,
sorry,
sorry,
Chair,
Angelina,
Angelina's
missed your hand.
Thank you. It was just a wee thought in case it may answer the point that we've just had a mini debate. Sorry, Angelina Foster, board member. In signalling the future priorities, the report already does flag that the CCF work remains a priority, and that continue to seek scrutiny and assurance and so forth. So I wondered, Brian, if that is enough of a signal to cover off your point. Don't know, but it's in there, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah,
it's in the second paragraph under number 4.
Yeah, I personally, I don't see it like that, but I think there's perhaps a broader point that I'm making here, and maybe, you know, I'd be happy to have a further conversation with you, Fiona, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, let's do that. And when we've had that further conversation and tweak it, we'll ping it round by email and get everybody to sign off. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Angelina. Andy?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. Andy Main, Head of Function for the Portfolio Office. Might be a little bit pedantic, but on the cover report, section 5.2 under Financial, it states that the purpose of the Change Committee refers to the capacity to deliver and milestones and scrutiny over the milestones. If it's financial, I think that should be more directed towards investment versus value around the portfolio, and that cost benefit, you know, analysis type of stuff, and the forecast of actual costs and the performance of the financials across the portfolio. It's not about capacity and it's not about milestones. But maybe just if we could revise that.
Could you just ping me the appropriate words, because I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
That's another action, Heather, for Andy to ping me the words, and also for Brian and I to pick up off table to look at the wording. Right, are we done on value added statements? Yes, good, thank you. We're on to agenda item 9, slight rejig of order here. We're going to take Safe and Well first, the change request and dossier, because Ali Perry has another meeting he has to attend. So before we go into that, Gillian, would you just like to run us through the dashboard?
Thank you, Chair. Gillian Buchanan, Deputy Portfolio Manager. So yeah, I'll just give you a quick overview of the dashboard. So you'll see that the Sdmp projects, Community Risk Index model, demand-based duty system and station and appliance review are all sitting red for skills and resource. And today we actually have the updated framework and change requests for all of these and updated dossiers, which John MacDonald will speak to later on. The People Training, Finance and Asset Systems programme is showing amber for time and skills and resource. And again, we've got Paul McGovern here today who will give you an update as to why that is. And we will be expecting a change request at some point once he's firmed up some of the milestones, etc. RVDS strategy is showing amber for time. That's just because they're refreshing the project and having a look at the dossier. You should expect a revised dossier at the next change committee meeting. We're expecting it at the next SMB. CCF is showing amber for time, quality, skills and resource, but I know that you're all well versed on what's happening with CCF, but we will be discussing that later on in the private session with John and Gary. So that's that one. The Emergency Services Network is showing amber for time and red for cost. And Paul Stewart can answer any questions should there be any round about that. McDonald Road, we will be discussing in the private session, but you can see red for cost and amber for skills and resource. In the West, Asset Resource Centre is amber for time, and Ian Morris is on the call should there be any questions around that. PVG is all green, and we have a closing report for PVG coming to our meeting next week, SMB, so you should see the closing report for that at the next meeting. And Safe and Well is showing green for time, excuse me, cost, and skills and resource, and Amber for quality. And as you have just alluded, Ali's here to talk to the change request and updated dossier for that project. But I'm happy to answer any specific questions round about the dashboard.
Thanks, Gillian. Any questions for Gillian? Okay, thank you. Oh, Brian.
Thank you. Yeah, Gillian, just on the Sdmp project, the red for skills and resources, I wonder if you can give us an update on when the appointment of the public involvement and engagement team is likely to happen. And also we heard yesterday about the retirement of John MacDonald, who has been a pivotal person in this process, and John's departure, as I understand it, is quite imminent, and just wondered how that might impact on the project.
Paul, do you want to?
Yeah, so some of this can be picked up at the agenda item when we speak a little bit more around the CRIM and the Station and Appliance Review and demand-based duty systems if you wish, but I can cover it just now in terms of the resources. So there are three main areas of resource in terms of the service delivery model programme that we are currently progressing and are active in terms of filling these posts, and they are the public engagement and consultation team, of which there are 3 posts, a managerial post and 2 officer posts. There are other recruitment ongoing around the impact assessment team and the business case team, who will look at the various different areas right across the organisation. That's for a station commander post and a watch commander post. And the third area is securing the long-term future of the strategic data analyst post and the GIS officer post. All 3 of them are in train. Shortlisting has concluded for the consultation team. The station commander has been identified and offered the post. The watch commander has been identified and offered the post only in the last week or so. And we are going through the process of job evaluation, etc., and all the intricacies that are required in order to secure a strategic data analyst post and a GIS officer post, all of which have been approved at SLT and is now a process to be followed. So there are 3 distinct sections, Brian, that we are alive to, we are active to, and the reason it still remains red is primarily due to the fact that we have not secured the services of all of these people yet, and I'm reluctant to change that in the event that there is anything that may well come into play that impacts on that. In terms of John MacDonald and his pending retirement, I'm acutely aware of that, and we are working away around options to backfill for John and options around the structure of the Sdmp. And at this stage, I wouldn't want to say any more than that at this stage, because we are actively looking at various options, and they will be presented to SLT when appropriate.
That's helpful, Paul. Thanks very much.
You're welcome, Brian.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, so moving on then to Safe and Well. Ali, and I think, is Kevin joining for this as well, or is it just you?
Hi, Chair. I'm Ali Perry, Head of Prevention and Protection, and Kevin McCusker, the Project Manager for Safe and Well, is on the call.
Okay.
So I'm aware we touched on the dashboard there. Can I pause and see if there's any questions on the dashboard before I move on to the change request? Okay, so I'll move on to the change request in the papers. If you give me a second while I just find my place. So this change request has effectively been a long time in the making. Back in March 2021, the project manager, Kev, and I identified through the Safe and Well board there are a number of challenges facing the project, a lot of those linked to COVID, which impacted on ourselves. We had ceased doing any home fire safety visits at the time, other than some in the very, very high risk criteria. Also, our partners have been impacted by COVID, and as you know, Safe and Well is very much a project that focuses on partnership with other organisations regarding safety. So we requested a challenges paper be brought to the Safe and Well board, and that was March 21. Following that paper, we asked Kevin to produce an options paper on how we might consider moving forward with the project given the circumstances we faced. That came to the Safe and Well board on April 21, and then in May 21 that was taken to the SMB. On the back of that, a change request has been developed, and that's what's in front of you today. What we were very, very keen to do, and there were three main options presented. One was a pause the project, given the circumstances we were in. One was look at amending the timeline. But what we found in looking at the analysis and the challenges, this wasn't specifically a time issue. It was an issue about challenges we are currently facing in the environment. So we looked at, well, we want to keep the momentum going, and reasonably, what can we achieve going forward to keep the momentum of the project going? And that was, as is before in the change request today, to conduct a pilot. Now that pilot will involve our community action teams across the country in a variety of different environments, so remote, rural, urban, etc. And as I say, across the three SDAs, so involving the whole of Scotland. There's flexibility built into that pilot, so we can bring in other staffing groups if it becomes appropriate. So that is by way of background. And if we look at the change request itself, the description of the change is in section 2.2. It's an extension in the project timeline to incorporate an extended pilot, inclusion of a pilot within the project scope. Now, there was always a pilot there, but we've created additional stage within the dossier to incorporate this extended pilot, reordering an addition of some supplementary milestones in stages 2, 3 and 4, the inclusion of analysis of the pilot within the project outputs, and associated resource and financial implications that are relevant to the amended timeline. And then we detail some of those milestones within the paper, and we come on to the reason for change at section 3 to allow a test of change, to allow feedback and analysis of this major project to widen implementation, to allow progress while a suitable rollout date is identified, to contribute to delivering a quality product, to highlight increase in overall and a potential, and I can come on to that if you wish, a potential increase in overall project costs and ensure good project governance. And I'll pause there, Chair, in case anybody has any questions.
Thanks, Ali. Any questions for Ali? Nick?
Thanks, Ali. Could I just take you up on your offer to just explain a little bit more about the potential increase in the overall project cost, please?
Absolutely, Nick. So there's a number of key changes with the introduction of the pilot. It does move the timeline on. We were hoping to have a rollout in the initial project timeline in September 2021, and clearly because of the impact of COVID, that is just not possible. Therefore, the pilot will be, as in the paper, till April 2021 and potentially beyond. What that means for the timeline is we won't be training all our staff across the service this year, that we were hoping to train all our whole-time and RDS staff in the requirements of Safe and Well, and there was an associated cost of over 400,000 in that training. So what we've done is we've identified at this point, this at relatively early stage in the year, we can release funding to the wider organisation that can be used more effectively. That's around £380,000. However, we still need to remember we need to do that training. So that training will now move into the next financial year. So we'll have to submit a business case, and that's in the process of being worked up for that. And in addition, it means that staff such as Kev, the project manager, and other staff we have working on the project will need to be incorporated into that business case. And it's really those, the prolonging, if you like, of the timeline will require those staff to still remain engaged in the project beyond the end of the financial year.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. No further questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Nick. Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Sally. I mean, the extended pilot seems eminently sensible. Two things, and apologies, I've probably missed it in the paper, but could you just clarify how this is extended the timeline, by how much? But I think this connects to my second point, which is around there's no estimate of timing in relation to phase 4. And while I appreciate that you won't know what the pilot throws up, is it not possible, or indeed good practice, to try and estimate the timing of the rollout?
Thank you, Brian. So the extended timeline, the initial rollout was intended to be across the service beginning in September 2021. That clearly can't happen. So within the pilot, it is suggesting that we pilot for a 6-month period up till April 2021. And if I can go, I hope that answers that first question. And then if I look at some of the challenges that we were facing regarding putting a specific time on the wider rollout of the project. So one of the challenges that's captured in the options paper in May is the ability of uniformed staff to deliver safe and well is clarified. So there's work ongoing around the role of uniformed staff in conducting this. And I know there are discussions with our colleagues in the representative bodies. A full period of communication engagement will then be required to bring the project into the wider organisation. That will include with our partners. The project's its component parts is fully tested and complete. When that's done, we can roll it out, and hopefully that will be by April. And the implementation date complements other projects as part of the wider change strategy. So we are aware there's demands elsewhere, and I know we've got ACO Stewart on the line, and ICT have been hugely supportive with Safe and Well, but there are demands on ICT from a number of areas across the service at present. So we want to ensure that we're building flexibility in. And I understand your point. We could look at, as we move through the pilot, firming up dates for a wider rollout, but at the moment, I just don't want to overpromise and commit to a date that we're not sure we could deliver against.
Yeah, thanks, Sally, for explaining those challenges, and I can understand much more clearly now why you're to be confirmed. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. And just to confirm, it's September 2021, and it's now piloting until April 2022.
No,
yeah.
Sorry. Yes, that's correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
April 22. Yeah. My apologies.
No, that's okay. Keep going, Ali.
Okay, and then we're
Thank
on
you.
to the project dossier, and within the project dossier, the changes are highlighted in red, and they effectively mirror what we have discussed in the change request, and that the milestones that are included within the change request are reflected within the project dossier. And also in section 12, the business case, we make reference to the potential changes to the budget that I've already described to the committee, but happy to take any questions on that as well.
Any further questions for Ali? All content? Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Chair.
Ali.
Thank
and
you.
Kevin. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
So over to you now, Paul. Emergency Services Network change request and dossier.
Yeah, so the papers have been submitted, Chair, and distributed. This one, from my point of view, is fairly succinct in terms of our involvement and our ability to influence. It is a movement to the right at Home Office level, and there is not much as an organisation we can do to impact on that change. Main reason is that there's a move to the transition completion, which was Q4 23 and is now Q3 25. And there is also the airwave shutdown has been moved from Q4 24 to Q4 26. And there, I believe, and I've still to do some work on this, that the full business case has now been approved at Home Office level, but I'm awaiting confirmation on that. And once I get it, I'm pretty sure there's something in my plethora of emails that indicates that it's been approved, but I have not yet went into the detail of that. So it's simply a move to the right, Chair, as frustrating as it may be. However, without being too sloppy-shouldered about it, I think as an organisation our hands are tied with this one.
Yeah. Is there, yeah, no, absolutely. What additional risk does that present to us, if any?
It's more around, the risk for us is more around the kind of short to medium term actions that we have taken as an organisation based on our expected timeline levels. So, for example, the OI tablets were purchased and put into play, and they're in for a certain period of time as the ESN comes in and starts to take over all of that capability and whatnot. So there may well be some risk associated with having to look at that again and having to either refresh or redo because we don't have the full capability in terms of the emergency service network. So there are things on the margins that start to impact on us from a financial perspective, from a resource perspective, that we will have to have a more detailed look at now that and if the full business case has been ratified. And the problem with this is I'm not convinced that that's the final move to the right with this one. And I think that's the key challenge for us, I think, at the moment, is identifying an accurate life cycle for this programme and thereafter taking appropriate actions, decisions on that life cycle of the project stroke programme. So I know that's a bit of a woolly answer, Chair, but it's one that as we move through this, there may be other things that come to light, and I sense now at project level and at the ESMCP project board, we will now need to delve into this in terms of understanding the implications and the impact of this move to the right and what it means to us as an organisation, and then that will come forward as appropriate, you know.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very challenging one, but that's good to hear that the risks are going to be dug into. That's a grammatically correct phrase. Nick, your hand was up.
Well, it was up until Paul said his last bit and you confirmed it. So there we go.
Right.
I was just really I was basically saying, you know, exactly what you just said, Paul. You know, it's probably worth collating then, isn't it? It's just having a really good horizon scan to see what implications there are. If something you believe is going to be slipping to the right, what are the final implications? But I'm quite sure that it's in capable hands. So I will back right out of there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Brian.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Paul. I mean, one of the interdependencies is around the CCF project, and I wonder if you could say, just recognising that we're going to have a discussion on CCF in the private session, but if there's anything that you could say about those interdependencies. And the other point, just kind of building on Fiona's question about risks. I note in the risk analysis the risk in relation to coverage. It says that the new network and building coverage isn't as strong as the current airwave offering, and that the mitigation is ongoing drive testing. And impact and likely probability are both scored at 4. It reads quite alarming that, you know, something as fundamentally important as, you know, strength of signal is a big risk. And I just wondered if you could maybe say a little bit more about what that actually is, and whether, and maybe I'm misreading it, but having someone driving around the country testing the strength of the signal is all that we can be doing.
So yeah, I'll take the first point in terms of the interdependencies with CCF, and maybe we will have a more detailed discussion in private session later, but the ESMC board and the CCF board are alive to the interdependencies, much of which at the moment revolve around airwave connections and all of the different interdependencies from a technical perspective. But it would be better if we have that chat, I think, in the private session when we have others from CCF, just to confirm exactly what I'm saying is accurate and that you are being provided with the most up-to-date and accurate picture. If you're okay with that, Brian, thank you. In terms of the coverage, you're right, at programme level, so at UK level, we are making significant representation around the coverage elements of this particular project. And work continues to build on the mast infrastructure. So at the moment, the mast infrastructure is not yet complete for the emergency service network. And we will have a presentation at the project board detailing all of the mast sites involved in the extended area services work that's ongoing at the moment. So we continue to make representation in that regard. In terms of the coverage across Scotland, again, work is ongoing to assess that, and as you rightly point out, one of that is about us having a drive around capability and to ensure that we are testing the coverage across the country. It may seem quite basic in terms of a testing regime, but I am reliably informed that that is the most effective way of you're essentially putting a radio on the ground and testing whether it works. And that is one of our areas of concern around building the coverage, ensuring that the masts are distributed in a way that allows us to have that coverage, but also that we can practically use that. We are in a slightly uniquely different position to other emergency service colleagues, where we can be on hills, for example, for days on end, fighting forest fires and things of that like, whereas you wouldn't ordinarily see other emergency services reliance on communications in that way. So at the moment, we have a number of trial booster coverage boosters in place. So we've got 26 of them within the service, and we are utilising them over a number of sites and through the critical operational locations where we see that there might be some limited coverage, in order to understand the impact and thereafter the infrastructure that might be required in order to ensure that that would give us the coverage that we require. But from an assurance perspective, from me as the SRO and into this change committee, I can assure the board and the committee that we are doing all we can in terms of representation at programme level, at UK level, in order to ensure that this coverage is what it needs to be, and eventually it comes to a sign-off. And as the SRO and ultimately the chief officer will require to sign off this area of work, and I will not propose that happens until we are absolutely content with the coverage that's in place.
Might I come back, Fiona? Just thanks, Paul. And I mean, I have every confidence that you are doing all of those things and doing them very well. Just for my own understanding, though, it feels as if you won't be able to fully test this until it's in place, by which time, if it's not up to scratch, will it actually be fit for purpose, or is that where the need for additional masts and additional booster mechanisms will come into play? Is that kind of how it's going to play out?
So we will have the opportunity. Essentially, what we're doing just now is testing the existing system and the growth of that system, the growth in terms of the mast infrastructures, the capabilities around introducing the coverage boosters. So actually, by doing that process, we are testing the system, and the process is that everything will be tested prior to any go live in terms of it. So we might be using slightly different language, Brian, but I am content that we will test every element of the system prior to us pressing the green button around sign off or the go live.
That's great. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Paul and Brian. That was really helpful, actually. Any other questions on Emergency Services Network? Content? Good. Thank you very much. And that takes us on to service delivery model programme and a certain Mr. John MacDonald, who rumour has it is escaping soon. I'm sorry, I gather there were some kind words said yesterday, John, and I'm sorry I wasn't there to hear them, but just I personally will be very, very sorry to see you go as you skip down the path with your golf clubs on your back, I'm sure. Okay, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks for the kind words, and thanks again to other members who have said similar things to me over the past couple of days. Very much appreciated. So good morning to everybody, and thanks again for the opportunity to take you through some of the changes that we are taking forward in terms of the governance arrangements around Sdmp. So I guess it's an apology because there's so much I've taken forward, but it's a sign of good governance, isn't it, that we're having to make such change requests and updates to the project documentation. So what I have in front of committee today is the presentation of 4 change requests and subsequently 3 updated project dossiers. All of these change requests have been through the internal governance of Sdmp board and subsequently the senior management board and have been approved to date to where we are. So first up, in terms of the change request, it relates to the Sdmp framework document, which as we know is the overarching document that provides that high level overview of the objectives, the ambition and the key components of Sdmp. And it's been updated primarily for 4 reasons. These namely are, first of all, to recognise the change of the RVDS strategy, moving out of the auspices of Sdmp and into the control and management of the operations function. And I know the committee are aware of the rationale behind that, but in summary, it was recognised that much of the areas that we were seeking to progress and take forward as part of the RVDS actually naturally sat within the business as usual environment, and the operations function were best placed to be able to deliver against that. However, what I will do is reassure committee to say that we have not lost contact with that key project because we know how important the RVDS is to our service delivery model. They're a vital element. In fact, they're more than vital, they're absolutely critical to ensure that we can maintain that. So the Sdmp are maintaining very close links between myself and David Farris as the other head of function, but also the subsequent team members that work with us to deliver against the objectives of both areas. So just to provide that reassurance. So it recognises the change that RVDS now no longer comes within the auspices of the Sdmp. We've also updated terminology throughout the framework document to recognise, the change committee has changed its name fairly recently, and updated that. Change programme, what's previously known as transformation. So we're up again. It's terminology changes just to make sure that we maintain it up to date. We've also added in information about the additional resources that the organisation has committed to the Sdmp, which I think is a real strength. It shows the value in which the programme is held, and it recognises that resourcing this appropriately is key to delivering success. So I think that's wholly appropriate that that's reflected across that overarching framework document. So that has been updated, and there will be future changes coming in that regard as well, I'm pleased to advise. And last but by no means least, and probably they're all important updates, of course they are, but this one probably is the most important one. It's about aligning the work of the Sdmp to the overarching strategic change timeline, which I know committee have seen on a number of occasions, as has full board, led by the chief and the DEP, and it just makes sure that the Sdmp references the key parts and the key elements of that strategic change timeline and where we actually fit into it. So that is now all presented and represented within the overarching framework document. So within that document, Chair, as always, all changes are identified in yellow, but I can reassure you that there is no fundamental change in the objective to what we're trying to deliver. It is housekeeping, I would suggest, in what we're doing. The next three changes that I present to committee, they're a result of what I have just talked about, which is updating the framework document, and they relate specifically to the project dossiers for each of the Sdmp component projects, namely Community Risk Index model, Station Appliance Review, and the Demand-Based Duty System. Now, it's not my intention, Chair, to go through each page of those dossiers because the changes embedded within that are exactly the same as what I've just talked about in terms of the framework, and I'm conscious time is precious and you would shoot the boots off me and I spend the next hour talking you through it all, and rightly so. So it's really to say again, the changes are presented within each of the dossiers in the yellow, highlighting for ease of reference for committee, and it relates again to some terminology. We've probably updated the detail around about the component parts of what we're going to deliver and when within the timeline. I think the first presentation and the first iteration of these dossiers were very, very high level in terms of the detail because we probably, to be honest, didn't have that information at the time and therefore couldn't present it. But we now have a very clear picture of what we want to do and when, and we've broken that down into component parts, which again aligns with that strategic change timeline. So, Chair, that's my update, the presentation of the 4 change requests and the 3 updated project dossiers. And as always, I'm always happy to take questions on what I've put in front of you.
Thanks, John. Very, very clear as always. Any questions for John? See, you did such a good job. Oh, Brian.
I couldn't let him off that lightly. Yeah. John, thanks very much. Very comprehensive. Just one thing to clarify, the movement to the right looks like 2 years. Is that correct?
Yes, Brian, it's pushed out to the right, but what we've incorporated into that is it's to allow us to not only develop the suite of options, but then go through due process in terms of that options appraisal. I think we talked about that yesterday in the strategy day, but also very, very importantly through to the formal public consultation, the 12-week one, and it then gives us space to allow us to respond and evidence that we've responded with due regard to the comments we've got back. And there's a very clear need, because if we don't do this, I think we'll be almost certain doomed to fail, is we need to develop an appropriate implementation plan on the back of what comes from the public consultation, because if we rush to a solution, we're going to end up in a bad place. So we've built in that timeline to allow us to build that implementation plan, and that needs to be done across the stakeholders as well. We can't do that in isolation. People like Ian Morris and his team, they're absolutely vital to informing that, given the nature of what's likely to come forward, and indeed, to identify what actually is realistic and achievable here, because we could be shooting for the moon, and whilst it's a great ambition to have, how deliverable is it? So all of these implementation elements need to be considered. So hopefully that answers why it seems elongated to the right.
Yeah, no, that's and you touched upon the next point I was going to make, and that's the consultation element, and I guess our understanding of the significance and the challenges round about that. We learn as we go, and it feels as if it's a reflection of that learning process. So am I right in concluding that a significant element of that shift to the right is attributed to the consultation process, and also there's a bit which is just the backlog that's been caused by the pandemic, I assume?
Yeah, I think that's wholly fair. We do recognise that the greatest area of risk to the programme and the successful delivery of the programme, it sits around about that particular element that you talked about. So the SLT are very clear on that. We've had some significant engagement and input and training with the Consultation Institute to demonstrate best practice in this regard. We've heeded that very closely because of the associated risk with that, hence the reason we are taking our time and we're stepping through it appropriately at the right pace. We're not rushing to solutions. And perhaps maybe just to give committee an update as well, because I know that, Chair, you asked off table for an update on this around about the public involvement and consultation team that we're currently recruiting. The closing date was the 27th of July, shortlisting this week, and we have got interview dates in the diary for the week commencing the 16th. So in due course, I'll hopefully be able to bring forward, or one of my colleagues will be able to bring forward an update to you on the progress that has been made in that regard. So I'm going to pause because I'm noting that the boss is wanting in, so I better stop before I say something that contradicts anything he's going to say.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Over to you, Paul.
I just don't think there was any need to rub it in there, Mr. MacDonald, around that someone else will need to provide the update. No, it's just on the consultation piece, Chair, and Brian, around that particular question. I think, if one thing we have learned from the discussions that we've had with the Consultation Institute, as well as the overall discussions we've had through full board meetings, etc., is that this is something that needs a significant amount of attention, hence the reason that we're looking to bring in dedicated staff. I think we are fairly fortunate from a learning point of view that we've had two very recent consultations around the vision, the future vision, as well as the unwanted fire alarm signal consultation. So we have some learning to gather from that and some process to gather from that. But I would suggest that any public consultation that we go to through the work that emanates through the service delivery model programme and the decision-making process through SLT and the board will ramp that up significantly. And we need to just ensure that the gunning principles that you will hear and through the various different legal routes are all adhered to, and that we are, as an organisation and as a board, assured that we are doing things in a structured and systematic way that meet all of the needs of a consultation of that type. So I sense this will be subject to many discussions at full board with around the consultation, and some direction being taken and decisions being made at the highest end of the organisation in that regard. So I just wanted to provide that quick overview, if that's helpful, Chair and Brian.
Very helpful.
Thanks, Paul.
Any more questions for John? Nope. Can't believe this is your last ever change committee, but we wish you all the very, very best. And yeah, thank you for everything.
No,
Thanks,
thank you
John.
very much. Been a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you.
Moving on then to agenda item 9.2, people training, finance and assets system. Paul, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I thought we'd maybe begin just by recapping on the different tranches of the programme, but we'll split it out into 4 tranches. The first tranche of that is looking at our finance, HR, payroll processes, ways of working and supporting systems. The second tranche that we're looking at is around the rostering, and rostering in its complete sense, whole time, retained, volunteer, and all the processes and practices that go on to support that. The third tranche is around training, and the fourth is around asset management. So that's the 4 main ways that the programme is broken down. The overall timeline for the programme, unfortunately, somebody's decided at this very moment to start banging at my door. I'm going to hope that they go away. I don't know who it is. So the overall timeline for the programme is that we're currently projecting to March 2025, and that's for all of those tranches, subject to a change going to the SMB. Previously, that had been projected at 2024, but we think that 2025 is more realistic because we've also factored into that timeline that process of benefits realisation, so that we make sure actually demonstrate have we done the things that we said we would want to achieve. So that's the timeline for the programme at a very high high level. I think they've gone away now, which is great because I just stuck something through my door, so apologies for that. So what we've been doing, I just kind of started posting in January of this year. I've been building up that core programme team. So I've got myself as programme manager. We've recently onboarded a programme officer. We've got a procurement category lead and a senior business analyst have also forming part of that core team. We're augmenting that with some contract resources. We've got a contract business analyst and a contract project manager who are also working with us. So that's part of that core team. But one of the key things that we've been at pains to do is to demonstrate that we're bringing in the resources from the different directorates. We recognise that in some cases we're only going to get a percentage of their time. And for the current phases of the different tranches, that's okay. But we recognise when we get further down the line to the implementation stages, then that will need to change, and we will be looking for people from the directorates full time. Part of one of the main reasons for bringing in those resources from the directorates is to really drive home the point that this is our pod directorate, this is our finance directorate's programme. It's not my programme and it's not the core programme team's programme. This is very much about the business doing this to themselves. I very much see my role as, and the programme team's role, is supporting them, helping them focus, bringing in the skills where needed, but they need to tell us what needs to be done. How is it that they want to transform? What do they want to change? And what do they see a better vision of the future it is actually being? So much of the focus of the last 6 months has been around that first tranche of our HR, payroll, finance systems and processes and procedures. So we've been doing a fair amount of analysis of that, trying to understand what are the current challenges, what does the organisation think better will actually look like, and what might that target operating model for the future actually involve. So thinking about things like, well, what would the level of automation be? Would we talk to suppliers a lot about self-service? Would self-service necessarily fit an organisation that doesn't traditionally sit at a PC? We've got firefighters who are a lot more mobile than that. Similarly, if we're looking at, for example, one of the things we're considering is a single finance HR system. So what change would that actually facilitate? Would that mean a closer alignment between those two departments? What fundamentally would change if that's the route that we go down? So some of the deliverables of this first phase are around developing a business case. The programme board has decided that we're going to use the HM Treasury 5-case model for business cases. The 5 cases being a strategic case, economic case, commercial case, financial case, and a management case. And each one of those has got its own particular purpose. So we've done a fair amount of research into what actually involves and looked at various examples. We've engaged with Scottish Government and other organisations about how they have done that process. But the purpose of that business case will ultimately be to get the level of investment we need to implement these systems, which will be considerable over the next 10 years, which is the length of time that we're looking to put contracts in place for. Given that these types of systems, i.e. HR, payroll, finance, we would define them as our systems of record. So they're the big core fundamental systems that we want to have in place for 10 years. Some of the other peripheral in the sense that they're not core HR finance systems, we might identify them as systems of differentiation. So we might be more willing to consider shorter contract periods for them, but that's for further down the line. So we've been using some contract resource to help us with that business case, and also crucial, I forgot to mention, develop a statement of requirements. Recently, our business analyst, who was a contractor, left, which is one of the hazards of using contract business analysts. So we've taken that as an opportunity to have a bit of a regroup and a rethink if that's the best way of doing it. Should we carry on as we have been, or should we think about other things? So we've recently onboarded a research partner, an organisation called Gartner, who are a global IT research company, and we're going to lean on them quite heavily to get some input in some of those key decisions about should we be thinking about a single HR finance system, or should we be thinking about separate systems. But we're also at the programme board we had on Monday looking at the options for bringing in another partner, a more of a client-side partner who's maybe taken organisations on this type of journey before. So there seems to be quite a large ecosystem, much kind of more niche, smaller, medium-sized enterprises who have got specific skills and specifically dedicated to helping organisations on that ERP journey. So I'm in the process of putting together some costings, some estimates for what that might be, and how potentially that type of organisation, allied with our research partner who have onboarded, could help us with some of those key decisions and help us with some of the key inputs we need for the business case and the statement of requirements. So that's some of the key activities we've been involved in recently. We've also been engaging with other customers of suppliers to learn from their experience. So we've spoken to some private sector and some public sector organisations. And some of the key messages that are coming out from them are, you can never think about your data too early. And whatever you do, stay standard. Don't start tinkering with off-the-shelf processes, because as soon as you do that, then you're going to look at increased cost, you're going to look at increased time, and the level of risk is going to go through the roof. So that's something that we've been articulating everywhere, that we want to adopt, not adapt. But I'm acutely aware that's really easy to say. And as soon as we say to somebody, we're not going to do that process like that anymore, or even we're not going to do that process anymore, what value does it actually deliver? That's when we know that we're going to get some significant pushbacks, and that's where that change management piece comes in, and make sure that the business is ready for it. We've got clear messaging about what we're trying to achieve and why. And crucially, that if we deviate from that, then it's going to cost us a lot of money. It's going to take us forever, and it's going to be very risky and probably not deliver some of the benefits that we want to see. So that's something we're focusing on, making sure that we're developing our comms to make that real to people. And the way we're thinking about doing that is actually using some concrete examples of picking a couple of short and easy processes that we've currently got and saying, well, this is how this might change. Because I'm acutely conscious that things like adopt, not adapt, stay standard might not necessarily mean a lot to folk. So that's something we're thinking about. How do we actually break out of that just kind of management speak, if you like? So we're engaging throughout the pod directorate and the finance directorate, but we're also aware that that's engaging at that back office practitioner level. So we've started the process engagement with each of the SDA management teams, and by way of a gentle introduction, asking them what do they think about how do they feel about the service they get from pod and from finance. Not asking them about the systems or anything like that, just generally how do they feel about the service that they get. And the picture they paint isn't great, if I'm being brutally honest. There's a perception that a lot of the processes and things that we do in those service areas are almost self-serving. They're not necessarily focused on the mission critical activity of mobilisation and responding to incidents. So I think we've got a job to dig into that and understand what exactly do they mean. What's the empirical evidence for that? How does that actually impact on the job that the frontline firefighters do? I think it's a valuable perception. We don't want to ignore it, but we also do want to get some actual kind of hard facts and figures around what that actually means. But just anecdotally, somebody said at one of those management team meetings, I ask about somebody's absence report and I'm told they're absent 150% of the time. And it's that type of thing, and it's that feeling that people have been undermined by the lack of confidence in the data. So so they weren't paid in a particularly great picture. So we do have our challenges. But the second thing we've been asking them is, how can we get in about service delivery? How can I get our business analysts, potentially our partners in about and speaking to those people at all levels, whether it's firefighter, crew commander, group commander, etc. A whole time retained, and that we're very much pushing at an open door. They very much want us in. So we've got before we do that, we've got a task to get our house in order and make sure we fully understand what we're going to go and ask them. Been really clear about what is it they want to get out of that engagement with those frontline members of staff, and getting away from that just designing a system that fits for back office practitioners, which I don't think we would get many thanks for. So in terms of timescales, our current finance and HR systems, they're due to expire in April and October 2023. We think that we're going to need a bit more flexibility around that, and we've started the process of engaging with the suppliers to understand what would the costs and what are our options in terms of getting some flexibility to give us the time to make sure that we do this right. I think the thing that that I've certainly appreciated over the last 6 months is that we haven't done this before, particularly if we're going to get a single HR finance system. That's new, so we need to make sure that we take the time to understand that and understand what the actual follow through, all of the implications of that change and what that fundamentally mean to the business. In terms of the costs for that first tranche, I think I articulated at one of the previous change committees that we've had a huge range of potential costs from suppliers, anything from £750,000 implementation costs up to £8 million implementation costs, which is a significant range. So we've got we've got a task to define our scope a lot more, but then go back to the market, go back to a research partner and other customers and potentially a client-side partner and get a lot more accuracy in terms of those costs and feed that into the business case that will evaluate the various options that we need to be thinking about. In terms of governance, now that we've got project managers on board and we'll look to bring in another project manager around about September, then we're thinking about how does the programme board take a step back and have a more strategic overview, and actually stop calling these things tranches and calling them projects. So we have an HR finance project, an operating project, and we can do that now that we're bringing on those project managers, and we're having thoughts about what the structure of that looks like, how the governance works, and how it relates to the programme board. And I think it'll be a wee bit of a challenge getting the programme board to take a step back, but we'll see how we go on with that and take a more strategic view. Just very briefly in terms of that rostering tranche, we've just this week onboarded a business analyst this week to start the process of identifying stakeholders, understanding what the organisation's vision is for rostering in its widest sense. But again, making that point that we're not here to give you a new system. We're here to help you spec, identify, implement a new system for yourself. It's you're doing this to yourself. So we're going to be working up that. We're anticipating an 18-month procurement journey for that, followed by implementation. And while the HR finance branch of the project will have a significant impact, obviously if we're not paying people, if we're not recruiting people, then that will have an impact on our ability to mobilise. But the impact of those rostering systems is much more visible because it's much more day to day. It's not back office, it's frontline, and just making sure that we're aligned to that difference and what that tranche of the programme is going to have a different outlook. So it's absolutely relatively early stages. The other two tranches around training and assets. Again, with training, starting to have that discussion about where does the training directorate see themselves in 5, 6, 7, 8 years? What do they see as better? With asset management, we haven't started that process yet, and I think the difference with the asset management side is it generally feels more mature. Certainly from a back office perspective, there's a level of contentment with their processes and their systems. So in terms of that burning platform metaphor, it doesn't feel that it's quite there in asset management. So that gives us a little bit of comfort that we can leave that towards the fourth tranche of the programme. So I will pause there and see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Paul. I'll open up in just 2 seconds. I had a whole list of questions and you have pretty much answered all of them in that excellent update. I just wanted to comment on a couple of things that, you're talking about what I would call voice of the customers, so that the people that are actually going to be using this and engaging with them at these early stages and instilling that sense of ownership in them. I think that's brilliant, and that is absolutely fundamental to the success, because this is huge. It's a massive programme of work. Gartner, that's great. I've worked with them in the past and found that extremely useful. And yeah, I found that update gave me, again, a lot of confidence, and thank you very much. I'll open up now to the rest of the committee for any questions. Nick?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paul.
Can't hear you.
Apologies, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Apologies, sorry. Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Paul. Very comprehensive update there, Paul. A couple of the first point's a general thing, but then leads into perhaps a more overarching comment, may be also directed towards Andy. To be quite honest with you, Paul, it was fantastic. I felt you're doing such an amazing job, and there's such a lot going on. But I prefer to have a few written notes. It was a verbal update. Now, I don't know. The chair may have already had a view on this, and I apologise if I'm if I'm treading on your toes, Chair. But for me, I like to go back and refer to the notes and refresh my memory a little bit. And I just wonder, and I'm absolutely, one of the key champions of not creating work, but I think in terms of a verbal update for something critical like that, with so much going on, I'm having difficulty even now recording what you said at the beginning of your comments. So that would be really helpful. And perhaps something you did mention at the beginning, and apologies if you did, but I'm just not quite crystal clear on the relationship of the work that you've just talked about there with the program office and Andy's work. And I wonder if you could just, one of you perhaps just explain that relationship between these two projects, please.
I'm happy to come in there, Paul, and offer up a bit of insight, if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it, Andy.
Yep, perfectly reasonable question, Nick. So obviously being early into the organisation, actually one of the first conversations and discussions that were had was with Paul in relation to this particular programme. So at this moment in time, I'm not coming in there to be a disruptive influence, but I have requested of Paul and the senior responsible owner that I do sit on that programme board. So that I can get some insight to the governance arrangements that are being put in place. That programme board and the stakeholders within it will become key to the design process in terms of some of the frameworks, the governance arrangements that we want to put in place as a portfolio office. I think there's a lot in which we can take and learn from what they are currently doing and roll that as a consistent standard within the organisation. So it's not that they are duplicating any work that we intend to do as we move forward. We have the opportunity where we can take PT fast because it's still within the early stages of setup and mobilisation. And look to take that as a potential blueprint in terms of how we do subsequent programmes or projects in the future. So I'll be working very closely with Paul and that programme board and how we integrate some of the learnings into what we want to do. Hopefully that answers your question, Nick.
Yes, it does. But it just leads on to the tiny little addendum question I had, which was, if you're okay with this, Chair, was a couple of the points that you mentioned there, Paul. I immediately flicked across to the CCMS project, and I was thinking, there's learning going on there all the time about things and how we've what was the expression you used? Adopting, not adapting, was it? Was that it? Yeah. And immediately sprung into that sort of world. And I just wondered how effective you believe, either of you believe, that the previous learning the service has on this type of work is being really, excuse the phrase, hammered home into this project, because it's so critical that we don't have the conversation in 3 years' time of, oh, here we are again. I thought we'd been here before. And so I just really want to seek some early assurance that we're really learning from the work that and the experiences, good and bad, that we've had so far.
I can give you one concrete example of that. I was involved in the tender specification for the CCMS back in 2014, round about then. And one of the learning that I took from that was that it was very internally focused. We didn't have the skill set of business analysts. We didn't think about bringing in people like Gartner or client side partners. So I think that's something that I've very much tried to not just ask ourselves, and because we only know what we know, but actually open it out, bring in professional skills of business analysts who can talk to the whole business. I remember sitting in rooms in Tollcross with folk from Northern Ireland Fire Service in their own control rooms and doing it that way. We're not doing it that way. We're not sitting in the room just working that out ourselves. We're very much looking out to the whole business to do it. So it's just one concrete example of the learning, but I do have engagement with the CCMS project on an ongoing basis just to make sure that we are kind of touching base. And for example, they're going through a gateway review shortly with Scottish Government, so I'll be keen to understand what was their experience like, because we only go through that same process as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. And just to be absolutely sure, it wasn't just the CCMS I was talking about. It was wider than that as well. But no, thank you, and thank you to both of you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Just on that comment, Nick, at the beginning around a written update, I support that. I mean, as the programme has obviously got a lot more detail around it now, and I think it would be really helpful. I also am a champion of not creating work. So if there is an existing, I don't know, highlight report or something that you're already producing, then you know, that if that works for you, certainly I'm not looking for something that's specific for us, if you know what I mean. So a highlight report that could just change the name of the Recipients Change Committee would do us fine.
Yes, I'll engage with Gillian and work something out.
Great, thank you. And Heather, will you catch that one as an action? A few hands up. Angelina, I'm not sure who popped up first, whether it was Angelina or Brian.
I think
Angelina.
It
Okay.
was Brian. Well, thank you very much, Brian. Thank you. So it's less a question, more an observation, Paul, building on something that you said. You shared that from some of the kind of internal soundings that you've taken, there is a perception, and I think you used the expression that some of our support services are seen as a bit self-serving. I think that was the expression you used. And it seems to me that that transition from that perception of self-serving to support services that are seen and valued as being much more enabling of the front line, that's the holy grail that we need to chase down here. So that's the first observation, not a technical point as such. It's more a what is this endeavour about type point. But trying to build on that, this is a pretty well-trodden path across Scotland's public services. So I think my observation, Paul, would be if we're not already doing it, there may well be value in seeking out other public service partners who are a bit further down this path, who would now self-assess that they have made that crucial transition from self-serving to genuinely enabling support services. And either your Gartner may well be able to point us in the direction, but also typically that's something that our finance and HR and other colleagues, their own professional networks, may well take them into that territory. So if they're not already being asked to, go seek folk who've found that particular holy grail, then that might be useful insights at this relatively early stage. Just a thought.
Thank you.
Paul, just an excellent comments there. Are we already doing that? Are we talking to?
Yeah, so we've reached out to Police Scotland and understood some of the things they were doing. They were involved in this process a few years ago, but they seem to have paused. I don't want to use the word faltered, or use the word paused. But we're also speaking to Scottish Government, and they're doing a similar exercise, looking at their core HR finance system. So I'm due to attend some of their supplier demos later in probably towards the autumn. They've offered to share with us their maturity assessments of their current processes and the statement of requirements that they've recently issued to market. We had some engagement last week with Renfrewshire Council, who implemented an ERP a few years ago, and some of the things that they were telling us, they were very, very honest, kind of warts and all appraisal of how they got on. And just by way of example, the thing that they got wrong was they did start tinkering with off-the-shelf processes. and they didn't really think that they delivered the value that they would have liked. So we've also spoke to some private companies. We spoke to Liberty Steel, for example, just again, same messaging. And we're speaking to West Midlands Fire this afternoon about their experience with Oracle.
Excellent. No, that's great. Thank you. Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Fiona, and thanks, Paul. Just on that last point, I mean, you might want to think about speaking to some universities in Scotland as well, because a number of them have done this type of thing. So that might be a possible, and I would, so you can think about that. Just to clarify, Paul, when we first started to talk about people training finance and assets, or PTFAS, as we're now referring to it, we did so on the ambition that we would have one all singing, all dancing system. And in your update, you talk about an integrated finance and HR system. Do I take from that we have now nailed our colours to the mast, that we will have one system for finance and HR and separate systems for these other two things? Maybe if you could respond. I've got one further question, but I'll let you respond to that if I may.
Yeah, so the answer is no. We haven't nailed the colours to the mast. There's certainly lots of different opinions. I think our view on the relative pros and cons of a single HR finance system or separate systems is something that we need to validate with the market. So as part of that, developing that business case, we need to evaluate the excuse me, we need to evaluate the options and work out what are the actual pros and cons, and fundamentally, if it is a single system, what changes? What fundamentally is different between the way that we do HR and we do finance? So that decision hasn't been taken, but I think that there is a strong view that we're unlikely to get a single system that does the whole breadth of that. And the part of the reason for that is we're not willing to make the amount of compromise that we think would be involved in functionality. So if we get a single system that does everything all the way from recruitment through to PPE management, then we recognise that there would be quite a significant level of compromise. Some systems will be stronger in this area, some in that area, but we feel that we've got the sufficient integration capability, because everything that we're going to buy is going to be cloud hosted, and cloud has moved on significantly, and the opportunities for integration are such that we feel that we could integrate these more satellite systems into that core of an HR finance system. Similarly, we could potentially integrate HR system A and finance system B, and the level of integration might be sufficient, but that's something we need to test and pull out in that business case.
That's helpful, and I mean, I'm encouraged, but also nervous about your comments about engaging with stakeholders, and encouraged because you absolutely have to do it. Slightly nervous in how you analyse and assess what you get back, because I mean the big danger, or one of the big dangers in this sort of process, is you end up with like a wish list that just goes on and on and on. So in my experience, one of the ways that you actually kind of regulate that is that you make a decision in principle that what you're going for is an off-the-shelf system. So you kind of corral and manage the expectations based on that. And I'd be interested to know whether the expectation at this stage is that there will be an off-the-shelf solution, and it will only become bespoke if there is an absolute clear requirement for it to go down that track.
No, absolutely. Our expectation is that we will be delivering off-the-shelf solutions across the piece. At this stage, there's only one bespoke solution within scope of PTFAS, and that's our scheduling tool that we use in the training directorate. But that system is it's been in place for a while, and there are off-the-shelf products that do that type of thing. I know that, and for example, you mentioned universities, that's their bread and butter. So at this stage, I'm certainly not envisaging anything being bespoke.
Glad to hear it.
Thanks, Brian and Paul. Ian, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Chair, it was just to support what Paul was saying there, that from an asset management perspective, looking at this, Brian, we've had the initial look at the oracles and various other ones there. They do bolt on what I would class as a bolt on functionality for the asset management functions for fleet and property, etc. Whereas at the moment, the systems we've got are deemed as best in class for the legislative requirements for maintaining these assets. Hence the reason we would be overcautious about any dilution of that, and they are off-the-shelf systems at the moment. But as Paul alluded to, the key priority for there is going to be the interfacing of whatever, if you want to call it, parent system comes in with that best in class for each of the sections, and so we don't have any dilution of the functionality of what we're reporting on. So it was just to support that. That was the dialogue that we're having at that level.
No, that's really helpful, Ian. Thank you. Any other questions for Paul? No. Really excellent update, extremely helpful, and yeah, I'll just reiterate that reuse whatever is appropriate for future written updates, and we look forward to hearing more from you at the next committee meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. Also, just to mention, John Dickey has joined the meeting. Welcome, John. That takes us on to agenda item 10, and I suggest that we go through that and then we'll have a break after that, if that's okay with everybody. Okay, so Gateway Review Action Plan. Andy, is this you or is it Julian?
This is me, Chair, if that's okay.
Yep.
Lie squarely at my feet. So I think, as we discussed at the recent workshop that we had a couple of weeks back, my intention moving forward is actually to define and establish a roadmap that reflects a continuous improvement programme related to the portfolio office, as opposed to the Gateway review report that we have just now, which we pour over, every single committee meeting, every single SMB meeting that we have internally. So I made a recommendation internally to the Senior Management Board, which was to close that action report down in replacement of a roadmap, which would then be reviewed as part of the SMB agenda and to be taken as an agenda point as part of the change committee, so that we could review it on a quarterly basis. My intention would also be to actually make that roadmap accessible. So whilst I'll give a quarterly update on the progress that we're making, that roadmap should be accessible to the change committee at any given point in time, so that you can see progress being made and ask or seek any clarifications or questions. So that is my recommendation, Chair. So I want to put that to the committee and just invite any feedback or questions.
Yeah, makes perfect sense to me. Thanks, Andy. Any questions? Excellent. Oh, Brian.
You're on mute, Brian.
Sorry, dinosaur evidence there. Apologies. Yeah, you've answered the question actually, Andy, because I said how can we close off this action plan, but there's these kind of loose ends, so that the roadmap is the way forward. I guess the only aspect of that I would welcome your very high level thought is just around benefits and the benefits tracker, because that feels as if there's still quite a lot of work in progress needed there. The specific recommendation talks about kind of reviewing it, which really is not the substance of what's needed. What's needed is a new, good working system. So will that emphasis come through your kind of roadmap?
Absolutely. I think not to state that we quite need an overhaul in terms of what we're going to do with benefits management, but it does need root and branch review in terms of how we're going to do it. And I think as part of the workshop, one of the proposals was actually to recruit into that space that allows us to do it properly and effectively versus what we're trying to do today. So that would be reflected via the roadmap, Brian.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Brian. Okay, no more questions. Thank you very much. Moving on to 10.2, the project evaluations. Paul.
Yes, so the reports again submitted, Chair, for everyone's perusal, the Rapid Response Unit, Rural Full-Time Post and the new Watch Duty System, and the for scrutiny around the combining of the action plans and collating that into a single process, particularly following the post-project evaluations and the identification of the actions that are required following each of these reports. And essentially, the proposal here is to do that in order to strengthen sight of the actions that are required to be progressed and the governance arrangements around that action plan, and ultimately to aid the performance management of that, prevent duplication and all of the things that we have identified in the past with numerous action plans. The other advantage of doing that is much of the action plan actions, too many actions in here, fall within the portfolio office. When you see that collated towards the end, and I think from a personal point of view and from a directorate point of view, that is very timely in terms of the work that's ongoing around the portfolio office assessment just now that Andy and Gillian are heavily involved in, and the production of all the different areas of work that Andy's already progressing and identifying, because much of it can be seen in some way or other through the action plan. So I do think it's very timely, and I think that it is appropriate that we move it into that combined action plan following all the evaluations, but it's here for scrutiny, Chair, in terms of thoughts, views, opinions of board, and for us to have any discussion that you would see appropriate.
Thanks, Paul. Excellent. I mean, we've talked about this quite a few times. I think the quality of the project evaluations is excellent, gives us so much richness in terms of lessons that we've identified, and as we always discuss, it's about learning them and really embedding them in the culture. That's the tricky bit, but really good progress on this, and I'm absolutely fully supportive of a combined action plan, and it gives Andy a lot of starters for 10, you know, in terms of progressing the portfolio office. So excellent stuff. Brian.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I guess if I were to be in any way kind of critical, it's the evaluation is largely around the process, the project management process, and I don't see as much as I thought I would have seen about the actual outcome of the project itself. And I mean, this project predates me, so I don't really know what I would have expected to see, but I do recall significant amount of comments from longer serving board members that the introduction of the 5-watch system was not without its difficulties, but that doesn't seem to come through in the report. Now maybe that's quite deliberate, but if it's a post-implementation evaluation, I thought we would have talked more about whether did this product achieve what it was intended to. But maybe that's just my view of it.
Well,
yeah, I broadly agree with that, Brian, in terms of, you know, your observation there, and I think your observation around the governance and process is an astute one, because I think the focus is on the governance and process, because if I'm also being critical of the overarching projects, without being very specific in any one. It's elements of process that have been missing, that have prevented the actual capture of what it is that you're looking to see. If that's fair, I think that's a generic assessment, and that's some of the discussions that we've had around benefits management, benefits realisation, the identification of a change life cycle, all of these different elements that would aid and abet the identification at an early stage of what we're trying to achieve, and then the measurement of that through a number of gateways as we move through that process. So I think your observation is very astute, Brian. I agree with it. I don't think the information is available to include it within the report, if I'm brutally honest. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a maturity thing here, isn't there? I mean, we're pretty near the start of the journey in terms of understanding these things. And yeah, just as you described it, Paul. Brian, does that satisfy your...
Yeah, absolutely, and I really respect Paul's honesty in responding to that, so thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks. Any other questions for Paul, or are you all desperate to get comfort break? Great, thanks very much, Paul, and at that we shall take a 8-minute comfort break. So 11:45, if everybody could come back. Thank you all for returning very promptly. Moving on to item 11 on the agenda, risk. Gillian.
Thank you, Chair. So you've got the report front of you, which highlights that we have got 6 new risks that have been added. There are 3 there for McDonald Road, which probably could be discussed in detail if need be in the private session. There's a people, training, finance and assets risk there as well, which I think Paul highlighted anyway in his update. And there are 2 new risks for the emergency services network, which again have been touched on. And I'll also point out that we've had 6 risks which have been reviewed as part of our governance process and have gone back on just to the project risk register, and have not reached the red status to be reported through us, and one of them CCF. There are 3 from the Safe and Well project, again, which you got an update from earlier this morning, and 3 from the emergency services network. So that's just an overview of the risk register, and if there's any questions that I can answer, I will answer, and if not, I will be able to refer to somebody else that may be able to answer them.
Okay, thanks, Gillian. Any questions for Gillian? Nope. Strategic risk register, Paul.
Just whistled right back into my chair at the right time there, Chair. As I heard you saying strategic risk register, Paul. So the strategic risk register and the associated directorate risks are presented for discussion, essentially. Chair, there are a number of areas that you might want to look, or there might be questions on, so I probably will just cover them. I think we have probably already covered the issues around the resource and capacity within the Sdmp one. So that was the only one that I had noted in terms of discussion. There are others on the call who may wish to speak to other risks, but happy to take any questions or have any discussion, but it's been submitted for your information.
Thanks, Paul. Any questions or observations on the strategic risk register? Nope. Okay, thank you. That takes us to the committee rolling forward planning. So the forward plan, we've talked about the PT FAS written update. So that will be changed. Any other comments on the forward plan? Nope, good. Items for consideration at future IGF board and strategy days. I can't think that we've come up with anything No, that's good. I haven't missed anything then. And now our favourite bit, Heather, review of actions. So if you would like to run through them, and I hopefully will be able to input with my notes as well.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So I've captured 4 actions. First one, item 6 action log. So item 8.5.6 on role and action log, the position statement to be updated to more closely reflect the action against Portfolio Office. Item 8, the value added statement, Chair to have further discussions and capture the points raised today, and then a revised statement will be circulated for the committee to sign off.
I think there's also in there, Andy was going to update the words in the financial section.
Yeah, it's in the cover report, yeah.
Yeah, and also that we'll email the amended version for agreement.
Yep, sign off,
okay.
Yeah. Then item 9.2, people training, finance and assets, highlight updated written report to be produced for future meetings.
Yep. And the only other one I've got is the gateway review. So closing that and incorporating in the roadmap, and that would go against Andy. As Nick.
Apologies, Heather. You might have just said this, and I might have just misheard what you said. We were going to go back and just do something from the rolling action log. Is this what you just said about the rolling action log? We were going to go back, weren't we? And I was saying at the end of it all, we could.
Yeah, you were to remind me. That's right.
Yeah, that's on my list. Next is for item 8. If the committee are content to close off that action now that it's been included in the dashboard report presented today.
Content? Yep, excellent. Has anyone else any other actions that we have missed? I don't think we've missed anything. No, that's excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks, Heather. And now I've lost my agenda. Not very helpful. Bear with me a second.
The date of the next meeting, Fiona.
That's quite an easy one, isn't it?
How about the 4th of November?
Thank you. You just carry on chairing, Nick. That'll do fine.
Trying to be helpful. Trying to be helpful.
What have I done with it? Right. Anyway, thank you. So that endeth the public session. Are we on a different link for the private session, Heather? So thank you all. Dial off, and for those that are attending the private section, I shall speak to you in a couple of minutes once I've found my agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.